ストに来てくださったので、ボブにね、特別にプレゼントをご用意しました。We have Matthew! Matthew!
Well, hey, I don't want to make a big deal about it, but I'm talking about a movie today. I'm talking about Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation from 2003. Review it is a word for what I'm doing here. I'm going to review Lost in Translation. So I think what I'm thinking of doing with this is I'm just going to have my score up front in the thumbnail, so you know going in immediately how I feel about it, and then if you're curious to find out why I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I have a bone to pick with this movie a little bit because when I'd first seen it, I was in a difficult spot in a relationship. I was dating Scarlett Johansson at the time, and she was in Tokyo, and I was wondering, who else might have been in Tokyo at the time, and I've pulled a few strings, talked to a few friends of mine. Turns out Bill Murray is actually, in Tokyo around the same time, and there's a line. Let's not do this again.
Let's never come here again, because it would never be as much fun.
Whatever you say. You're the boss.
I don't think she was faithful. Anyway, it's a good movie. The big ideas with the movie are, social isolation, obviously being kind of a fish out of water story, is largely about alienation from the social world. Performing, having to project the person you're supposed to be in front of other people, trying to be real, finding what's real about yourself and expressing that in front of somebody else without shame. And that's a great twist on what I feel like is very typical of the male equivalent of that theme, which is largely in the isolation. But the removal, the embrasure of isolation, rather than the complexity of like finding out who you are and not attaching it to your identity, but kind of making sense of yourself while in the absence of like people to test your personality against. Because I think something that this movie demonstrates pretty well is the image that we have to have in front of other people, sometimes in order to, literally keep up appearances. We have images that we calibrate for certain social settings, and the social setting in this movie is a very vibrant one, but ultimately one that's like really unfamiliar to the characters in the story. And that is played with, it's a sort of almost escapist fiction, not fiction, but fantasy. An interesting setting for a rom-com. All these, all this goes towards it being like, I would say 3 stars. I think that last half star was probably earned somewhere in the late middle of the movie. It's a very private movie. You get a lot of like, and I don't know anything about the focal lengths of cameras, but I kind of have an understanding of like what they do to the image, how a focal length will affect the image. And I feel as though there was just a very close and personal feeling to a lot of the bedroom scenes. There were a lot of bedroom scenes in this movie. That proximity to a character gives you a very intimate relationship with their emotions and their feelings, and so a lot of this movie actually takes place in what's left unsaid instead of what's actually stated. I would actually highlight the fact that like there's that final line between the two characters, Scarlett Johansson and Bill Murray's characters, at the end where they start embracing each other in the crowd, and Bill Murray whispers something in her ear. The audience doesn't know what it was, but it was very deep and very meaningful, very, very private between these two characters. So private we don't even get to see what it could have been. It was a very special moment, and I think that the sentimentality of it is probably what earned it its final half star for me. Oh, you know what actually annoyed me about it? There were those characters on the peripheral. They're just those peripheral characters at the beginning who were just really obnoxious, really annoying, and not in a way where it was clearly meant to demonstrate that, like, look at how fucking stupid these people are. It just wasn't a very friendly attitude to have around a character. There's that, like, white guy with the beret who was talking about making hip hop beats. Utterly pointless character, but like easily one of the most annoying parts of the movie to watch. And this is in a movie that's altogether pretty hard to stomach during certain parts, especially where there's a lot of well, you're lost in translation. There's a lot of Japanese, and ideally, I think the audience at home doesn't have a way to understand that. I think if subtitles were involved, or if the audience knew Japanese, the movie might actually be a little worse. I think almost for sure, if you speak Japanese or you are Japanese, you'll probably not like so much some of the mocking that happens directly to people's faces by Bill Murray's character. That was a little. That Bob Harris was a little rough, but I think that's supposed to be balanced by his like inability to connect with the people around him. I don't know. That was probably what knocked off half a star for me personally. The black toe bit where he was just talking to the chef.
You like that idea? See, they load black toe over in this country. You got a sharp knife? Gotta be, this country, somebody's gotta prefer black toe. Black toe. Or we should probably hang around until someone orders it. Hey, what's with the straight face?
Little, but whatever. I think for the purpose of being alienated, it was important to be in that kind of headspace where maybe you would be a little less forgiving of the eccentricities of a culture that you feel is just very removed from your sense of stability. Because, the character Bob Harris is dealing with stuff back home, it's super stable back home, and he actually doesn't even really need to be a part of it. So, like, he's kind of wondering, what am I supposed to do with myself if, like, being a father isn't that pressing a demand for me at this point. It's already become so difficult and so complicated, my relationship with my wife, and that makes me question, what I'm valuable for, especially now that as a washed up movie star, your looks are behind you largely, in the eye of the public, your talent is behind you, your best days are over. And there's that line, or there's that whole scene where Bill Murray is talking about how much he loves his kids, but how like having them literally destroyed the life that he had prior to them. Um, and that was like a sweet scene because it ends up being a lot more positive towards the end. But yeah, I would say his lack of stability in the new scenario is exactly what leads him to kind of going a little crazy, a little midlife crisisy, as the movie points out a number of times. He was perfectly off balance in order to see a side of the world that he never would have otherwise. And I think it was a very good movie. 3.5 stars out of 5 for me is a very good movie. I would say it's kind of hard for me to feel very strongly about a movie unless I am myself personally able to uh, feel very attached to themes or ideas expressed in the movie, or otherwise just feel like the writing is just like way up here. If I find like every character is despicable, as long as the writing's all the way up here, that's still a pretty good movie for me. And overall, I like to gauge my rating on experience, the actual experience of sitting down and watching the film, not necessarily just how perfect the film is in a kind of vacuum, because the watching process is not a vacuum. You know, I grew up just seeing my dad watch movies a lot, and I was always kind of wondering how he was able to enjoy them with how much noise was happening in the house. There's like dishes here, there's a vacuum over there. My brother and I are arguing, and he's just like sitting down and rewatching Fight Club again. And so I was very I think affected by the idea that like there is no perfect way to see a movie. You know, Red Letter Media is always talking about how absolutely terrible their theater experience is, which I gotta say, completely opposite for me. I've really never had a horrible experience in a theater. I've had some talkative theaters. I actually, when I saw Nosferatu in theaters, it was the day after Christmas, so it was fresh, it was brand new, and everybody in the crowd was, I feel like, just ready to see a movie, because they didn't make a whole lot of noise. And honestly, whenever anybody else in the movie theater was making noise, it was kind of, I was doing it too. I was doing it at the same time. It was kind of a collective thing. And I don't mean to say that like I was trying to stifle other people's enjoyment of the movie with my vocalizations. But you know, there were just some funny fucking lines in that movie, and it felt good to laugh with a crowd, which I really didn't expect going into that, and really haven't had an experience like that since like comedy movies are dead or just bad. And I don't go see them. So like when I go see this weird new take on an old German expressionist film, I think it was. I don't even know if it was expressionist. It was just it's Nosferatu, you know? You don't expect to laugh at that. But it was fucking funny. There's some good lines in there. Overall, my theater experience is very good. But obviously, as I've described, none of them are free from interruptions or reminders that I'm actually watching a movie instead of like being in the movie, being a part of the movie. So my rating system is largely influenced by this sort of blending of like the movie itself, purely the film, but also like what kind of mood was I in when I sat down to watch it? What was my environment really loud? Did I have to pause it and leave? Because if so, I actually think that I can't rate that, right? I think like movies can't be paused. Not they're just not meant to be paused. You watch them the whole way through. You don't get on your phone. You don't eat hot chip and lie. So I think this was a pretty sound viewing. Little to no disturbances or removals from my placing myself in the film. Yeah, you know, I'd seen it already, so I knew the gist of it, but I was ready to sit down, give it another try, and I gotta say I liked it a lot better than my first time through. I think my first time through I probably just out of rage, just out of pure vitriol for what Scarlett did to me. I probably would have given it like 2 stars, but you know, I was much warmer to it this time around, and yeah, 3.5 stars out of 5. I don't know if I'll be making more reviews of movies, but I will continue to watch movies and I'll always want to talk about them. So, you know, it might end up recorded at some point. Who knows? Maybe it's edited. Who's to say? Maybe it gets uploaded. And you see how many stars out of 5 I gave it on the thumbnail. God only knows. Don't die. Bye.